But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining Strategy International in collaboration with Neapolis University Paphos, which are an institutional partner, university partner, and also the Moshe Dayan Center from the University of Tel Aviv, into another webinar that is very important, very dear also to my heart. And the reason behind it is that I've also spent parts of my life in the UAE, and also I've lived the development of the Abrahamic Accord, where I had the opportunity and pleasure to meet, among other, Nir Boms and Ahmed Kudzai. And today we thought that this would be a really good opportunity between us to discuss something very, very important that people from around the world may not understand entirely what it is, except knowing that it is a political agreement that may lead to further developments and relations between countries. This is more like people-to-people and development experiences of the Abrahamic Accord, and also the, if you want, the development and the impact, the positive impact that it can have with regard to Southeast Europe. Today, we have the pleasure to have distinguished guests, and I will go one by one. We have Mr. Mohammed Baharoun from Behoud Center in Dubai Policy Center. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed, for joining us today, Mr. Baharoun. We have Mr. Nir Boms, Dr. Nir Boms, who's also from the Moshe Dayan Center of the University of Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dr. Nir, Dr. Boms in this case, for joining us. And Dr. Ahmed Kudzai as well from Bahrain, who's a good friend whom I met via Dr. Nir Boms, actually, from Bahrain. And Ahmed is part of the Sharaka group for consultations, which is also part of the Abrahamic Accord that sees and oversees the values added on the Abrahamic Accords. Thank you very much, Dr. Kudzai, for joining us today also in this speech. Ladies and gentlemen, and just allow me to say a few things. Strategy International is a consulting firm and a think tank based out of Cyprus. And the idea is to proceed with more policy orientation, discussions, policies analysis, but also networking. It is a consulting firm that sees both global affairs and regional affairs as a discussion of civilizations. Without further ado, please visit strategyinternational.org if you would like to know more, if you would like to see more of our publications, our events, our podcasts, and our various events that are going to take shape in the next months and next years to come. Without further ado and delay, allow me to say that these are some of the rules with regard to the webinar that is going to follow today. In fact, I'm going to give the floor to each of our speakers, which is going to be followed by a Q&A session. The webinar should not last more than an hour and a half, and I hope it's going to be a vibrant one. So please feel free to write your Q&A, your questions in the chat box, and we'll hopefully will divert it to a specific speaker or all of those speakers if you do intend to. So please write down to whom do you address this question so I can give them the floor to answer within 1 or 2 minutes. Try to be specific on the question so we can give you a specific answer if need be. So let me make a small introduction. Why the Abrahamic Accord? Why? Because number one, all of us here as speakers, we lived this historical and most important political moment. More so because the Middle East is changing, and it is changing fast in terms of business, in terms of politics, in terms of bilateral relations, in terms of trade, in terms of technology, in terms of education, in terms of health. We have realized that there's more to be handled and more things to be achieved via dialogue and understanding, via comprehension in various affairs, whether these are political, economic, or religious, to say the least. We live in exciting moments, and we live in exciting moments which have a positive impact factor in other areas such as the East Mediterranean. And we do hope that you will have today the opportunity to hear out from some of our experts from around the world, which have the expertise, not only in their own specialty field, in their own respective countries, but also around the world. These are respected speakers. These are respected seniority, if you want, decision makers that have an impact in the way that we comprehend the Abrahamic Accord, the peace settlements, the idea of a more inclusive, participatory democracy where people speak and decide together. Without further ado, allow me to give first the floor to Mr. Mohammed Baharoun. Mr. Mohammed Baharoun, thank you very much again for joining us. And allow me, first of all, to thank you again for joining the panel of the experts, and more so to give us, if you want, an insight of what is the Abrahamic Accord, how does the UAE understand the Abrahamic Accord, and how does it develop 2 years on? What can we say about Southeast Europe, considering the relations of the Middle Eastern countries and Israel with Southeast Mediterranean countries?
Good afternoon to all of you. Good evening for some of you. Thank you, Dr. Marius, or please allow me to say Marius, and please address us in first name. We're all friends here. We've known each other for a while, so it's fantastic to be able to speak casually with all of you. Your question is very important. What is the Abrahamic Accord? And I say this is very important considering the events that are happening today. And also to answer a question that is actually on my mind, are the Abrahamic Accords resilient? Can they outlast the convulsions that we're seeing everywhere? So let's start with your obvious question. What is the Abrahamic? Is it a normalization agreement? Is it a bilateral agreement? What does it want to achieve? Does it want to achieve a peace between Israel and countries outside, or around Israel, but ignore or replace the peace with the Palestinians? What is it exactly? And it's quite obvious at this point that since the inception of the Abrahamic Accords, it was a regional approach. It was signed by 4 countries, Israel, UAE, and Bahrain, with the presence of the US in Washington, DC. And it was not bilateral agreements that were signed between Israel and Bahrain alone, and then Israel and UAE, and then Israel so that makes it sort of a movement that's a regional movement. It's a regional approach. A regional approach to what? Regional approach to one of those most chronic problems we've had in the region, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the reason why it was called Abrahamic, it was a deconflicting. It was trying to reduce the conflict that is started as a political conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, became a conflict between Arabs and Zionism, and then became a conflict between Muslims and Jews, and allowed a number of areas or countries to try and find a niche into this unstable area and expand that instability. So that is why it is called Abrahamic Accord. That it is, in my view, an experiment. How can we change the perspective from a friend, from a foe to a friend? And I think it gave us a chance to see how could peace be? What does it mean in that context? We've never really had a real peace. We've had a top-down type of peace between Israel and Egypt, and Israel and Jordan, but it was never trickled down to people. I think at this point of time, we've had it from bottom up in a way. The very first manifestations of the Abrahamic Accords were not the signing, but the visits between the countries, the type of respect dealt from the Israelis to the Arabs and from the Arabs to Israeli, a very rare experiment that we've never had really in the region. Growing up with this perception that all Jews are the enemy. This was the major shift in our perception. Based on that, a lot of cooperation that has happened on economy, on research, even on security and defense. But most, in areas where people can, education, health, these are areas that are close to human nature, and we've seen a lot of interaction over there. Now, if that is the case, is it, what is facing it right now? Is it resilient? And I think if the UAE think that this is a deconflicting arrangement, if this is a way of reducing the conflict, what is happening now by the current Israeli government is the opposite. We've seen a rise in conflict, and not only any conflict, it's the type of existential conflict of identities. Previously, we've seen a conflict of identity between Muslims and Jews. This is what either Iran says, Hezbollah says, Houthi says, damnation to the Americans and to the Jews. This has, in our views, has changed, but now it is coming back with other types of reasons that brings back this concept of feud between the Jews and the Muslims. And I think this is the type of problem we're facing or challenge we're facing. This brings us to the next question. Is this resilient? If the UAE came into this type of, or Bahrain as well, came into this type of an arrangement to reduce the hatred between Jews and Muslims, to convince them that they cannot be eternal enemies, that there are other ways of resolving, is what is happening now helping the Abrahamic Accords or not? And in my views, it's not. I mean, I'm slightly pessimistic about the outcomes. But what is good about it is that it's not now the Arabs or the Muslims who are against, or even the Palestinians who are against what the current government is doing. There are a lot of Israelis against it. So it tells us something, that there is something in common between all of us. Now, in my view, it is a bit resilient. It can, because of its strategic view. But again, a major incident or incidents that would change the current situation into a worse situation will put a lot of question marks whether the Abrahamic Accords have ushered a new area of peace or more areas of conflict. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much. I kept both an optimistic and a few questions, remarks with regards to how the future may be tailored, but overall I see it as a very positive value to the dialogue and to the ongoing and emerging needs, because we live in a world that is constantly changing. So we don't live into just another world where we divide black and white anymore with regards to foreign affairs and with regards also to bilateral or multilateral affairs. In fact, allow me to add that the Abrahamic Accord for us, I think for Southeast Europe and the European countries, even Cyprus or Turkey or mind you, I think this gives an opportunity for more dialogue to take place. And I think that dialogue is basically the initiation of a lot of things to take place. You know that Cyprus, for example, has an unsolved illegal invasion process that needs to be solved. And I think it's a good time. At the same time, you see the changes that are taking place in the Middle East. And you see that business and trade and common affairs. You saw the recent earthquake in Turkey, for example. This is a very big humanitarian question that brings people together to discuss the more the things that bind us together than take us apart. And I think you've raised the bar already by giving us an insight on how this is seen, if you want, from the UAE. Of course, there is much to be said and much to be done, but we are, I believe, in only the beginning of the 2 years plus, and I think that's why we called it a 2 years plus. Nir, what is your opinion about it? How does Israel sees this thing in Israel in this case?
Well, naturally, for Israel, this has been and is a very significant process. If you were looking at the trajectory of Israeli history and particularly at the trajectory of Israeli-Arab relations, we note that Israeli-Arab relations from the very get-go had started with a number of very tense moments, wars. The first 25 years of Israeli history has been in many ways constant wars, and until 1977, when the peace process with Egypt started, only then we began to see a beginning of moving out of this cycle. It was not an easy process in the region overall. President Sadat ended up even paying a price for it. And it took the Arab world another decade to bring Egypt back into the fold. It took some more time to do something similar with Jordan. And just like my friend Muhammad had mentioned, we have seen a dynamic of cold peace and certainly not a dynamic of deconfliction broadly. Of course, we do not have a situation of active war, but the Palestinian issue in particular, remain unsolved. and all the attempts to sort it out really did not materialize. And a lot had happened in terms of these attempts. And in the process, actually, the quote unquote peace process have actually resulted without, we can have another Zoom to analyze that, but it resulted in a way with a bit of the opposite. Since the peace process started, we've seen escalation, we've seen radicalization, we've seen the results of more roadblocks and checkpoints, and we've actually seen a generation of Palestinians and Israelis who knew themselves much less than the generation of their parents. We've seen less integration, and we've seen then the split of Palestinian polity as well. And to some degree, an attempt of changing the mindset and a moment in the region in where the perhaps one of the guiding philosophies to Middle East affairs that was adopted by many, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the key and the only key for any progress in the region, was gradually weakened. The Abraham Accords, one thing I can add, of course, are an important moment, but they're also an end of a process. Relationship between Israel and Arab countries, the Gulf, but not just the Gulf, started much before we can trace these relations. Now we have a number of books articulating the developments of these relations. But part of what I've just mentioned regarding the Palestinian file had served as a stopping point, because we're not able to move broadly in the region until the Israeli-Palestinian issue is sorted. Then there are some things that are simply waiting. There were other challenges, and some of them we began to articulate, that I think brought the regional partners to the thinking that we should move. Israelis, of course, welcomed this. For us, the term normalization is perceived as something important, particularly as a country that perceives itself as one that's often not being accepted by others in the region, and certainly not when it comes to the Palestinian, which is a big part of our debate within this context. And all of a sudden, the Abraham Accords are, from a symbolic value, that we have a degree of acceptance. We also have a degree of responsibility. I certainly subscribe to the camp that believes that this is done also as another attempt to move things forward, deconflicting the Israeli-Palestinian front, and perhaps afterwards we can relate to how the two can be, moved together. But the attempt of moving the relationship forward and bringing Israel to become a more accepted partner in the region, in many ways can potentially give Israel a bit more security, calmness, if I can use a little bit of political psychology, to say, well, if that's the case, then perhaps we can really have some other concessions and compromises, even when it comes to other more difficult issues, including on the Palestinian file, because we are now partners. We can be the model that we can imagine. Of course, this is very far away from reality, is when we can have really a degree of harmony, European style rather than Middle Eastern style. It is very far away, but perhaps the Abraham Accords gives a compass call on where things, can be. And allow me just to end with two, perhaps symbolic, points that articulates this direction. And one of them is what was part of the pre-launch, the launch of the Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi. I think this is very symbolic because this is also a process. It starts with the year of tolerance and with a gathering that focuses on human fraternity, of bringing the leaders of the Abrahamic faiths together with the Imam Tayyib of Al-Azhar and with the Pope Francis, then afterwards with the Jewish community, and with this very symbolic structure created in Abu Dhabi that takes all the Abrahamic faiths together, put them in one place with a similar size, although they're not, obviously the numbers of and the influence of Jews and Muslims and Christians vary, but putting all of them together in a way say, what, let's have a restart of the relationships between the Abrahamic family. There are some things we may have done wrong. There's some things that we have enormous baggage in history, but let's perhaps start from scratch and figure out if we can build something different and we can build a positive model forward. Symbolically, it's very, very important. And I think it's a very much of a symbolic, in a way, monument, a living monument for this Abraham Accords process. And the second one is something that you've mentioned, Marius, which is the earthquake in Syria and Turkey. This is a very tragic reminder that there are some things that are much bigger than political divides. There are some threats for this region that are objective. And they have to do with, obviously, forces of nature, but it also has to do with global warming, and it has to do with the environment at large, and they have to do with prospects, economic prospects. And of course, it has to do with radicalization, because if the radicalization that brings lack of stability is the exact opposite of the tolerance that brings peace, that brings prosperity. And that's a reminder that we need to work together. And I'm even more encouraged, and I'll finish with this, that I have seen for the first time a joint team of Israelis and Arabs and members from the Gulf states working together on bringing humanitarian aid to Turkey and Syria. And having this idea of partnership for MENA aid, I think, is one of the interesting symbol or results of the Abraham Accords process. The idea that we actually can and should work together as partners for the benefit of the region. We're trying to figure out how to do win-win, how to help each other. And if we will succeed in doing this, perhaps we can convince more of the young generation that this path is better than a path of radicalization and conflict.
Thank you very much, Nir. And I know that Nir believes in very much into people-to-people discussion, and I think that's what exactly we are seeing now. The MENA aid, for those who do not know, is a recent, a very, very recent agreement between the Abrahamic countries, including also some other Arabic countries, to help with the humanitarian aid both in Syria and in Turkey. And I think this is a lot about how people act when things are really needed, especially on humanitarian terms. On the other hand, you mentioned at some point the year of tolerance. I was very glad to see that firsthand when the year of tolerance started in the UAE, and I was very happy to have seen how it has progressed as well, not only as a person who loves the UAE and sees how the UAE envisions the world in this part of the world, in the Gulf region, but also the potential that tolerance, the word, the expression, and the application of tolerance has, not only in the religious affairs, but also the political affairs, because you also have to be tolerant when you discuss political elements as well. So it is really important to see that. I remember when the Pope visited Abu Dhabi for the first time, I lived it, and it was huge as a thing. Then the following year, the ecumenical patriarch came of the Orthodox, based out of Constantinople, Istanbul, for those that know as well. So this was also a big thing. The Abrahamic Park, an amazing project that really brought faiths together, the monotheistic faiths together. And not only, by the way, the UAE government, as I remember, has helped a lot into other Hinduist temples outside Abu Dhabi, if I remember correct, and more places of worship in reality, because there are a lot of nationalities that reside in the UAE, and that really makes a positive impact. But because of that, a big discussion started on how we can be together, how we can live together, how can resolve the pending issues that are at hand. And I'm saying this, and because we put here in the equation the East Med as well. There's a lot of other things that are still pending with elements of conflict, frozen conflicts, or resolution of conflicts, or conflicts that may lead to other suggested options, particularly because we live in an era of changing alliance landscape. And because of that, we are feeling confident that this kind of discussions, this kind of an agreement can have a positive impact. Now, if you allow me, gentlemen, to move to another dear friend who has been a people to people's person and a person who actually lives this out of Bahrain, a very unique country also, and a person that I had the privilege to, as I said earlier, for those that were not there, to meet over from near, and since has been in my heart for multiple reasons, but one of them is that he's a global citizen. I call him as a global citizen. Why? Because he tries to be as tolerant and as open-minded and as as approachable to the people as possible. But Ahmed, I think you need to give us your own experiences, exactly because you live among our speakers and because you have lived also from the point of view of Bahrain. What does Bahrain say on this?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this panel. And second of all, it's always good to see this group of friends, these familiar faces. And we lived those Accords days throughout. I mean, between Emirates, between Bahrain, between Israel, between Morocco, of course, and Sudan, but with the involvement or the level of involvement that they have, not so much, but we would love to have that. It's amazing. I met you because of that, Marius. I mean, it's amazing times. I'm not going to talk on behalf of my country. I'll talk on behalf of my own self, at least. I mean, as you said, beside being a political consultant, because of Nir himself, who got me into the people-to-people concept, I have the privilege today to manage some initiatives, taking people from the Abrahamic Accords countries to meet each other, to collaborate sometimes if possible, and so forth. So I'll start by saying a few words on the Abrahamic Accords itself. Unlike many people presume that the Accords are identical, each individual agreement signed between the Accords countries, and here it's between Bahrain and the State of Israel, UAE and the State of Israel, Morocco, Sudan and the State of Israel. Each individual agreement is different from each other. They're not identical. So I would say that they are exclusive yet inclusive at the same time. When we are going to discuss the one between Bahrain and Israel, we'll have to say that it's a one-pager that's generic, while the one between the Emirates and the State of Israel is completely different. We're talking about 7 pages in details of exactly what they want to achieve. What I'm trying to say here, it's exclusive. Why? Because each individual agreement is unique. Emirates is focusing, of course, on economy, on thriving, and that's why we see it today in bilateral trade agreement with the State of Israel, and they have reached around $3 billion so far. Not so much between Bahrain and Israel, yet on the region, on politics, on security, that's where Bahrain is thriving when it comes to the agreement. So each individual agreement is different. And I think that's the beauty of it all. You can't have one set of agreements between each country and expect the same outcomes. Of course, each country requires and aspires for different issues, different directions. That's one part of it. One thing my brother Mohammed was mentioning regarding the Palestinian issue and all that, on some part of it, I would have to agree. On some part of it, I would agree with Nir as well. And that's where I have my own input on the matter. We have tried and we have seen the whole world contributing towards a solution for that particular conflict. Where have we reached today? I mean, we have to analyze. I'm not going to say we have reached nowhere because that's going to be a stretch. On some fronts, we went forward, but on the majority of the fronts, we're going backwards. So if we say that throughout the years, we have done nothing, no. Many efforts were there, but reached no consensus. So what do? Do we sit idle or do we try another way? I mean, if the outcomes are not as per what our aspirations are, I think we have to try different ways. And that's where the Accords came in play as well. I'm not going to be dreamy and say that within 5 years, the conflict will be solved, because that's unrealistic as well, given that each individual agreement is different. But let's put it that way. If we are looking at it from a Palestinian, from Muslim, from an Arab point of view, there was no access to the Gulf countries per se, to Israel directly. And no pressure was applied before. Today, we could see that happening. We could see that happening in progress. Of course, it won't happen in a way that somebody will pick up the phone, whether you do this or else. You will see it happening through merchants, for example. Let's imagine one of the Accords countries having a stance against one move that recently happened, for example, from the Israeli government. And then those merchants from Israel investing in that country, they don't want anything going to ashes here. So they themselves will apply some pressure. There you go. Politics in place. Something could happen. Vice versa as well. Since previously there was no such thing as a direct contact publicly, today we will see it there even happening vice versa, where if let's say the state of Israel does not like whatever is happening in a certain country regarding how they stand against them for 1 or 2 or 3 issues, you'll see that happening the other way around. So going back to people now, if you have 2 angry politicians on one table, you get nothing. Get them some food, let them talk about it, get them out, let them talk about simple issues, and then you'll have friends. Of course, a discussion between friends is completely different here, and that's what we do in the people-to-people approach. We get people to meet, we get politicians, we get economists, we get merchants, we get students to meet each other. And the outcome of that, a change of narrative. We can't achieve world peace in 1 or 2 days. The Abrahamic Accords are an aspiration. I'm not going to say even a project. It's an aspiration towards a brighter future. It could work, it could not, but it's a step forward rather than trying the same old tools that we did before and reached us nowhere. I'm going to end up with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I have tons of questions and answers to ask all three of you, basically, but I'll leave it for the end. I just want to add, if you want, my own value on this, for the simple reason that there's too much to be said, I think, and already too much that has been done. And allow me to say how I see things. First of all, for people that do not know, the Abrahamic Accords has facilitated all the Arab world and including Israel with regards to communication with the world, travel, airline companies, cargo, trade. We're talking about hours, and these hours are a facilitation with regard to a lot of things, including also security concerns, security sharing, information, collaboration in international, let's say, institutions such as Interpol, for example, and goes on and on. Thirdly, it is amazing to see that you can go in places of worship and have the ability to be, let's say, from the monotheistic faiths, Muslims or Jewish or Christians, and have the ability and celebrate Ramadan, with Hanukkah, with Easter or Christmas. And it is amazing, and I know this because I've known also Nir for a long time, and while he invited us in his own place, he explained to us, for example, the importance of that specific dinner on a weekend, starting on a Friday evening, starting what it means for them, while also living during Ramadan in the UAE and understanding and be part of the families and the traditions, and most importantly, the celebration of the end of the day of Ramadan, which is also another important element for us, or living Christmas or New Year's, or being in an Arab country and having people coming up to you and say Merry Christmas. And you know, they understand the mentality. So it has facilitated a lot. It has changed a lot. And in fact, Ahmed, you're absolutely right. The UAE has changed so fast and so much that it has become inclusive not only to the world, but also the bilateral relations with Israel, unlike too much Bahrain, where Bahrain is also a proponent and is one of the very first countries to discuss about the Abrahamic Accord. But it was almost more embraced by the UAE in that sense and respect, more so because the UAE has 192 different nationalities residing in the UAE. So it has become a very important asset to give the opportunity, I think as a non-Arab, as a non-Middle Eastern, as the way that I see it and interpret it. But for example, the first time I met Mohammed Baharoun, when I was still a faculty member in Dubai at the American University in the Emirates, and when I had the pleasure, and we had the discussion in the corridors after a conference. I remember the first thing that Mohammed asked me is like, how do you see the UAE? How do you see things? How are things for you going? And that was really interesting. Mohammed, this is the first time I say that, especially in the public, but it remains. Because you asked me a very simple question. You didn't ask me, how are you doing with your job? Do you like your job? How are things with you? And going. You asked me a very Emirati thing after so many years in the Emirates, a very human-centered question that really, in the Abrahamic Accord, one of the elements that I've seen and I've discovered with regard to the characteristics is that everybody is attempting to approach the human value added and the ethics and the morals that come with the people. And that is really, really important. And I tell you that we are missing this thing, especially in Southeast Europe, when we discuss about conflict resolutions. We don't talk about the ethics and the values that overcome obstacles. We speak about political solely positions and solutions. It is therefore very important to see and envision the way that people to people see a possible resolution to any conflict, whether this is the frozen conflict in Cyprus, whether this is the Palestinian issue, and so on and so forth. It is also very important to speak about morality and values, balances that a democratic system provides, whether this is in Bahrain or in the UAE or in Israel or in Greece or in Cyprus or in Turkey, you name it. Third, and most importantly, one of the reasons we got inspired to start Strategy International, or the dialogue of civilization, was exactly because I've lived the Abrahamic Accord on a personal basis. I was a scientist that was mainly dealing with another conflict area, which is Ukraine and Russia. I was keeping far away from the Middle East for the entirety of the region. And finally, I find myself in the Middle East, in the Gulf, meeting amazing cultures and civilizations, things that bind us together, from food to music to culture to dances to traditions to religious elements that brings us together. This was also, and it is part of the tolerance program of the UAE, to share the combination of the things that bind us together also in the monotheistic faiths, if you want. Because there is for those who do not know, there's a big dialogue on the interfaith dialogue on how to bring things together, bring things closer. I believe that right now what I see in the Middle East versus to what I had read or what I was expecting to see by the time I had moved to the Gulf is that the Middle East in its totality, and I'm talking as a region rather than countries, are much more mature, and they're much more mature to lead on. It is of no coincidence, for example, that even Saudi Arabia has been engaged in so much change. Institutional, people, engagement, governance, investment, development, and so on and so forth, because it is a very big opportunity now, more than ever, with all these sudden changes and all these sudden challenges that the war in Ukraine has caused and the change of market economies and balances and so on and so forth. This makes it much more important, more than ever before, for countries to have a dialogue. And from my side, having it seen as a European, as a Southeastern member of Cyprus, let's say, or as a person who has lived or who lives opposite to Israel in geographical terms, or that visits and goes all the time in the UAE or Bahrain for that matter, it is an opportunity. It is seen as an opportunity and as a beacon of hope. And I say it as a beacon of hope. These are not big words because we don't have beacons of hope lately. And if you see, there's no other beacons that I know. If you think wisely right now, what is the other beacon of hope that has recently come? The only thing that comes to my mind is the Treaty on the Seas that has been agreed just 2 days ago on the 30% of the protection of the natural habitat of this planet. Other than this, there's the only Abrahamic Accord that can actually bring some sort of beacon of hope. It is therefore of utmost essence for people like us and others to multiply the attempts to bring sides together. Historians will judge the historical positive or negative attributions or contributions for that matter. There will be political analysts who will write more analysis and more books on what could be done better. But it has not been until very recently with the Abrahamic Accords that I've seen people trying to find the positive added value into collaboration, discussion, dialogue, and friendship. It is of no coincidence that when we started this webinar, we all said we're all friends in this webinar. And the question that was asked was, do we do an open and rightful discussion? And the answer is yes. People, I think from the European side, and I say personally, but I can also make a bit of critic for the Europeans in this case, we're fed up with political promises. We needed physical, practical human actions that lead to a possible conclusion that may lead into a more peaceful world. We say thank you to the Abrahamic Accords because it has a momentum. It builds a political momentum, a scientific momentum, a philosophical momentum, a momentum for people to come together and discuss. And I know that there are hard times passing through because of this seismic activity, both in Syria and in Turkey. Unfortunately, wars have not ended in northern Syria or northern Iraq in that respect. There is a problem still pending with the Palestinian case and the Palestinian issue on what can be resolved. The government in Israel is struggling to remain in power and somehow find a balance that can lead into further dialogue in the Palestinian issue. There's a problem in Southeast Europe. There's a problem with financial concerns in all of Europe with respect on where are we going with this. We have scarcity of natural resources, and we seek more contributions into world trade affairs and things that bind us together. At the same time, you have beacons of hope in the respective areas of the Gulf, where volatility has been turned into opportunity. And this opportunity is now surrounded by something that needs to expand. And I say this as a proposal, that this Abrahamic community needs to create more and bring more, if you want, Mediterranean dialogue discussants. And I put no one outside the door of the box. We need to be sincere that there are problems to be solved. And we need to have people inside the negotiations room. There are people that can listen and as much as say, respect, propose, but also seek solutions. It is not time to say, I am more powerful than you are. I have more people than you are. I produce more than you are. We're all members of the United Nations in the end of the day. And as members of the United Nations, we go according to the UN Charter, for that matter. So we need to respect each other and find solutions. There are bigger problems, and this comes over climate change. I mean, you see what's happening not only in Turkey but all around the world. The earthquakes have multiplied themselves. It is of no coincidence. So there are bigger problems and also bigger opportunities, by the way, because technology has provided us the opportunity to discover things outside the planet. You see now the UAE, for example, has sent the sixth astronaut into space, into the International Space Station. It leads on the discussion for a man-made mission into Mars, and also a man-made mission along with Artemis project with other people led by the United States. The Japanese are trying to go to space. The Chinese are trying to go to space. The Europeans are trying to go to space. There's a reason why we go there. And it is not only political influence and opportunity, but it's also exploration of space. We are explorers of this planet, and now we want to explore outside the planet. In order to do that, you need knowledge transfer, you need knowledge innovation, you need dialogue, you need discussions. In order to do that, you need to discuss. You cannot not discuss because you just come from a country that does not have a political will to sit down and discuss pending issues. So we need to put good pressure to people, positive pressure, in order to sit down and discuss pending issues, because we are above and beyond with problems. Instead of finishing each problem, we have multiplied planet Earth in being more warlike area than ever before. And things are not looking quite shiny at this point. So we need beacon of hope. This is the only thing that I can say with regards to the Abrahamic Accord. But if we go into more details, one of the things that I will say is that Cyprus officially had declared a general secretariat with regard to the foreign ministry of Cyprus, declaring the first secretariat on alliances and on dialogue, which was very important. It was the very first initiative that I had just discovered, not because I'm Greek or because I've seen that, but that was a very important milestone. It's small, many people do not know, but it's a milestone because the idea was to bring in, after the Abrahamic Accord, more sides to talk with each other and expand, if you want, the strategic collaboration between countries. And I'm expecting other countries to do that. Morocco has been a long way into that as well. And I promise the next time, especially in the Abrahamic Accord, to have a Moroccan representative into such discussions. It seems that other European countries are also following this path, especially for South Europe, or I'm saying South Europe, including Portugal, Spain, France, Malta, Italy, because they are also keen in establishing better relations with their counterparts on the opposite side of the Mediterranean. So again, the Abrahamic Accord has been seen as a political momentum that builds on more opportunities. It is not so much what we have achieved within 2 years. I mean, it's already big what has been achieved, because the path of establishing relations takes time. Supporting each other and respecting each other and trusting each other. Trust is a very important matter for that case. But I think the way that Cyprus saw it, because the identity of this country is to find peace and resilience to peace. I think it's a very, very much important issue that needs to be raised, that, you know, Cyprus is also here, Greece is also here. I presume Turkey will say at some point that it's also here, considering the necessity for more regional dialogue. And as I said, other countries, I mean, we see France, for example, as a major power or as a major leader in the European Union. Yes, but France has an invested interest, not only in the Gulf, but in the Mediterranean region, to solve pending and post-colonial issues that have emerged after the end of the colonies as well, for those that might forget about it. So everybody has an invested interest. The question is how many things do you bring on the negotiation table? How can you do it? How can you deal with it? How can you resolve it? And how can you proceed to next things? I presume, and this is me only saying in this case, that if we bring the outer vision, the vision that only leaders of specific countries, and I'm sorry for my friends in Bahrain or in Israel, but I've seen this in the UAE, where leaders say that there's no end to what can be succeeded, right? This is where, you know, the sky's the limit, basically, right? And the leaders of the UAE have been doing that into their own respective citizens, and more so to the residents. The residents, when they go back to their countries, becoming ambassadors of these ideas, by the way, because it's multiplied. And if we only envision to the world what can be succeeded in the years to come, in a combination of abilities, ideologies, and interests when they join together, we can really initiate a discussion of civilization and see better years. So thank you very much from my side, and as I said, from the speakers, to be able to say a few things. I think it was a very nice and honest discussion so far, and I will give the floor for opening discussions. There is one question. David Pellegrino is there, who asks is, how have the countries bordering Israel and the UAE, such as Iran and Turkey, reacted to the Abrahamic Accords? What might be the next countries to join the Abrahamic Accords? And how would this affect the balance of power in the region? I think these are 3 questions instead of 1. I'll take them all 3, and I'll give the floor to all of you for 1-2 minutes, but I'll repeat the first question is, how did Iran and Turkey react to the Abrahamic Accords?
Who should start here?
Yeah, Mohammed? I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ahmed is closer to Iran than we are, so you might want to take it.
No, I know, but I because
Yes.
I didn't give you enough time.
Let's say, you know, when it comes to discourse, there has always been, hostile discourse to any type of coming closer to Israel, or what is called normalization. This is not from Iran. This has been the norm. The Abrahamic Accord was breaking that norm, breaking that mold, creating something new. So it was, as far as actions are concerned, we did not have a war with Iran over the Abrahamic Accords. Actually, when it comes to Turkey, we've seen Turkey come closer to Israel after the Abrahamic Accords. So in that sense, I haven't seen a negative impact. The only negative impact that we've seen is that Iran becoming more vocal in supporting people like Hamas. It has always supported them, but it hasn't been very vocal about it until lately after the Abrahamic Accords. If you want to infer something out of that, you would infer that this concept of there were two camps when it comes to dealing with Israel. There's the people who want cooperation, and there are people who want, hostile confrontation. The camp of the people who wants cooperation scored a point. So the other camp now needs to make a comeback. And maybe this is part of my slight pessimism, is that the current tension might give more weight to those who would want to bring out the concept of muqawama as the only way to resolve this Palestinian issue. But that's my 2 cents on how did it affect Iran and Turkey.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Ahmed, since you're closer to Iran.
Yeah, closer only by geography. Well, basically, I'll take on what Mohammed led earlier. See, ever since the notion of the accord started, our relation with Iran is different from Emirates' relation to Iran. We have to understand that. It's more hostile. So when the whole thing started, Iran started through their officials and non-officials on a weekly basis, threatening Bahrain for their relations with Iran. Of course, Iran helped instigating the Arab Spring in Bahrain in 2011. Now, all of that being said, a year later, or exactly last year, an official from Bahrain announced through the Munich Security Council that the Mossad are physically engaging when it comes to concerning Iran and Bahrain. For a whole year, me and Nir talk about it almost every now and then, every conversation. Iranians, more than one, have been giving lots of threats towards Bahrain. Initially, over the first 6 months, it was hostile in the sense that we are going to bomb Bahrain over this, saying that this presence is threatening our national security and we're allowed to do it. So it was really hostile, still is, but just talk. So it came a bit lower. When it comes to Turkey, I join hands in what Mohammed said. Turkey actually had a turbulence prior to the accords, but they came closer. We're talking about Turkey. We'll add Jordan and Egypt, who had cold peace with Israel before, now feeling a relative to the whole matter. So I think they are either being idle or coming closer, but it's not going negative. When it comes to the Palestinians themselves, I'll just add to what Mohammed said as well. The Islamic Jihad and Hamas used to be helped, somehow financed by the Gulf states until 2011, where they shifted their appetite. They became closer to the hostile movements influenced by the Brotherhood. That made the Gulf states take a step back. Of course, they need finance. Whom did they sleep in bed with? Iran. And that made it more hostile with Iran and the Islamic Jihad and Hamas. I'll close with that.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Nir, I think you have lots to say as well.
Yeah, let me move this to perhaps some of the other parts of the questions. Of course, I agree with my colleagues here, and I will say the following. If we accept the notion that Mohammed introduced at the beginning, that the Abraham Accords should not be seen in the context of bilateral agreements, but with the context of a regional framework. Then when we speak about how a country like Turkey responds to it, I think we've seen a shift in Turkish policy. And I've actually been involved in the relevant Turkish dialogues with the rapprochement with Israel, but Turkey had basically understood what other players in the region understood. And it's not just even Turkey, it's connected to the internal dynamics in Turkey and the shift of President Erdogan and upcoming elections. But broadly speaking, I think Turkey came back to the idea that we need to have a win-win and not win-lose. I mean, they had a policy of zero conflicts with the neighbors about 20 years ago. They moved to slightly different direction, I would say. I think they paid a heavy price for this. And in a way, they're trying to pivot again. And part of the pivoting is basically saying it's not just about Israel, it really is about the region. And every time when I see somebody asks, what's the next country of the Abraham Accords, I usually tend to say, look, I'm not sure if it's the right question. And in many ways, it's not even the important question. Because the Abraham Accords, if you look at it as a framework, the question is which the next country that will get further to adopt this framework. And I think here, actually, when you're looking at what is happening in Saudi Arabia in the last few years, and even recently, some measures that are taking place in Oman, Turkey is certainly a part of it. And if we'll, having now this sort of brief discussion we had here about potential allies, working together to deal with an issue like an earthquake, that's the direction of the Abraham Accords. Many Israelis ask me that question. When will Saudi come next? When will another country come next? And I tell them, I don't think it's the most important question. The question is, can we move closer to accept this mindset? And then whatever name it's going to be called, it's going to be called, whether it's called the Abraham Accords, the Moshe Agreement, or the Muhammad Framework, I think it matters less. And I would say just the last thing that is related to, Mario, something that you said before when you kind of concluded the discussion part, which is really about identity, which is a very powerful piece. Part of what I think Israelis can learn from what we're seeing in the Gulf, and part of what the symbolism of this has a lot to do with identity. And identity is the source of many conflicts in the Middle East. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very much embedded in this, with the idea that you feel threatened by somebody else who is not willing to respect you and accept you for who you are and what you are. The model of the Abraham Accords and the Abrahamic family house is about, wait a minute, let's try to look at this differently. We can find a way to accept each other, traditions and cultures and practices, and not have that as a source of a conflict. The fact that somebody is different does not necessarily needs to be a threat. We need to find a way to accept each other so we can work with each other for the sake of common good for the region. That's the philosophical mindset of a lot of this. And that's really what differentiates between two major threads in the region. A more pragmatic, or sometimes I call it the axis of Renaissance, that accept this mindset. And the context of what Turkey is doing now is relevant to it, because part of it is interest, and it has to do with energy and gas, and the idea that taking the other out destroyed our lira, and brought it to a point in where they really have a serious economic recession, and they realize that it doesn't really work. And the axis of resistance.
Okay. I found this on the web for
and the axis of resistance that does not accept this mindset and enshrines this idea of continuing struggle. And in this, it's broader than countries. So let me end with this. And
I'm going to get a small joke as it comes through, because I heard Siri probably bring.
Siri gets excited. She really wants to be a part of this discussion.
Here's the Abrahamic Accord 3.0. If somebody puts ChatGPT on the Abrahamic Accord, make an analysis, what it would come out, I would be really interested in. That's because you said You put technology there as Siri as a small minor joke. But thank you, Nir. I mean, probably you've answered yourself with regards who are the next countries to join the Abrahamic Accord. But I want to ask you a question. Silently, we're always pointing out in specific countries with regard to the Abrahamic Accord: Saudi Arabia, Oman, Turkey. Right? No, I mean, Egypt and Jordan have also a relationship, but the Abrahamic Accord is a bit different with regard to Israel in this case. But what about other countries? What about, because the Abrahamic Accord does not limit itself in a religious aspect or perspective or other than this. I mentioned at some point the European countries, and I don't want to say about Cyprus or Greece in this matter, but what about the European countries? What about the other Arabic countries, Tunisia, Algeria? What about those? How can we progress on these things? Is there a progress? Malta, Italy, would they be interested, or do we see them as just one entity, European Union, so therefore you have an entity, you don't need that? Because you mentioned at some point, Nir, you mentioned that we're going for a political framework, a regional political framework. So are we, first question, upgrading the Abrahamic Accord to a regional political framework? Number two, who has the characteristics to join such an element, or is it an open door, as they used to say at NATO or EU level, as a regional international organization? And number three, do we concentrate on non-normal countries that we have a tendency to read about, i.e. Turkey, i.e. Oman, i.e. Saudi Arabia?
Can I jump there, Mario?
Yeah. This question is for all of you. I mean, anybody.
Okay. I think what Nir said is really worthy of paying attention to. He said it's not about which country comes next. We have a program here that's called the Future of the Abrahamic Accords, and we're trying to measure it on 3 dimensions. One, which is the how wide it goes, and that's the number of countries. The other is, how, with each country, how far do they go? So this is the, vertical approach versus the horizontal approach. The third one is on what does that result? If you're measuring the number of countries versus each country does, what does that lead to? What type of impact does it have on the region, if this is a regional approach? And I'll give you examples of this. We've seen the Negev Forum, and to me, the Negev Forum is a very good example of this philosophy that when it comes to security and cooperation structures, cooperation is the horse, and security is the carriage. It's an outcome of cooperation. That is, for instance, is difficult or different from the type of conversation between Iran and Saudi Arabia and Baghdad, for instance, where security is the first thing. Once we've agreed on security, everything else would come. So that is the difference. And so we're looking at areas of cooperation. Now, I would go as far as saying that even the demarcation agreement between Lebanon and Israel, the marine borders, would not have been achieved without the Abrahamic Accord. You're talking about other countries. Look at Singapore. Singapore has had very good relationship with Israel, but never opened an embassy until lately, after the Abrahamic Accord. And again, to them, they've always looked quite, let's say cautiously, about how would their neighbors like Malaysia and Indonesia would respond to a direct relationship with Israel. Now, with the Abrahamic Accords, that is not an issue anymore. So what we're seeing is that more of connectivity is happening as an outcome of the Abrahamic Accords. That is the cooperation aspect that would lead into people realizing that peace has got a real dividends. I can, benefit from it. But dividends means there is an investment. You have to invest something into peace. So what you think that you're losing up front is actually what you're winning more towards the end. And that's the concept of investment. So on this concept, it's not about what is the balance of power. It's about the balance of connectivity. Israel now, after the Abrahamic Accords, have got better relationship with Japan, with South Korea, with India, with Turkey, through the Abrahamic Accords. So it has shifted the way it is connected. It is no longer the secluded country that needs to live with its back to the wall all of its life. That has changed now, and they're realizing new potential of their relationship with the entire world. I would even argue that Israel, and maybe Nir would argue against that, but Israel is discovering its Asian identity rather than its European identity that has lived with.
Thank you very much.
If I can jump on that point, you've mentioned, Marius, Europe a number of times. And I think one of the things one can say about Europe is that Europe had led in the last few years the line that was in some ways against that process by pushing the mindsets that the only way to move in the region and the only investment that needs to be made is somewhere on the Israeli-Palestinian track. And even there, it was not always one of development, but in a way, sort of things that have more of almost a political flavor to them. And I think one of the things that we've seen in the past few years, and certainly with the Abraham Accords, is that the region began to take its own lead. And a lot of what Mohammed just mentioned has to do with the region taking a lead, other partners follow. And I think the Europeans kind of began to kind of make a whole circle. So, okay, so where do we fit in? And I think that there's an opportunity here to further incorporate some of this in a good number of very solid programs that the Europeans have in the region. We have some European partnerships that enable us to really do some of this bridge building, people-to-people work. And I think one of the most important things, from coming back to, again, one of the Achilles heels of the region overall with the Palestinian file, is to find more opportunities to incorporate more Palestinians within the broader programs, including the European programs, which are easier for them, that deals with a stronger regional component, and have additional stronger partnerships of doing things together to push this sort of axis of renaissance and integration. And that would be my even recommendation and call to you, your colleagues in Europe, to push that line.
Thank you very much. This is good news. We got a statement there. I like that part from Nir. Ahmed, I leave the last comment to you before I complete the session.
Okay. I'll go for what country is next. Mainly, I didn't touch on that. I would have to agree with Nir that it's not a matter of how fast we do the next country, or which is the next country as well. The process has started. The train has not left except for parts of it. There's room for everybody to join. There is a room for change of heart. There's a room for adjustments here. And then when I say adjustments, I'm talking about all sides. Parts of what we've learned throughout the past years since the signing of the agreement is that we don't know each other. Israel does not know the Middle East. The Middle East does not know Israel. Israel stereotyped us as Arabs, and we stereotyped them as the others. Ever since the Accord started, we started traveling back and forth on a personal level, all of us here. We found out that we really have no clue. Who are we dealing with? I'll just give you an example. When Israelis say something, it's done tomorrow morning, and they expect the same from everybody else. Unlike us, the Arabs, we take our time with things. Hence, that created a bit of misunderstanding throughout the years. That's why we need people to get to know each other, consider the dating phase. Let's not rush into anything right now. Let's just take our time to get to know each other, to understand how things are done or conducted. Regular business things. The laws. We in the Gulf, for example, been colonized by the British for some time, so we are adapting a blend between the French and the British laws in our courts and how we conduct some business transactions and all that. If that's not understood by the Israelis, for example, it will make lots of legal issues here and there. We don't want that. Let's take our time to get to know each other. That will make an understanding happening, which will lead to prosperity and so on so many levels. And then when that happens, this will create a success story that will lead on others to join or not to. There's no force here. We want people, or we want others to join in this club based on merit, based on relativity, based on optimism. I have to like what I want in order for me to buy into it. I shouldn't be forced into it. Let's set an example and good things will follow.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I think the discussion could go on and on and on. There's a lot of things, good things that have been put out here. I do have some comments, but I won't make them. Nevertheless, what I would like to say is, first of all, thank you very much for the time that you have spent in explaining to us your own point of view with regards to the Abrahamic Accords. This was a very honest, vibrant, and discussion that really identifies the source of opportunity, if I may call it like this. I take into the fact that it's a train, as Ahmed said did, with a lot of opportunities and issues, like Mohammed said, which is a train of identity and regional approach, with a structure that is based on good faith and good understanding, as Nir would say, which is a peoples to people, because the train includes people inside. And I thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity to hear out from experts from your own respective countries and to seek out a solution that really is the discussion of civilizations. The only thing that I would like to add is that as a European, I see the Abrahamic Accord as an opportunity to reestablish our values. The European Union is not a borderline, it's just a union of good wishful and moral, based on common morals and values, Europeans. And we always work together for the benefit of this dialogue. And it is very fortunate that both Israel and the other Arab countries that are part of the Abrahamic Accord have picked on the opportunity to initiate and ignite a dialogue that we really wish, and I wish personally, to expand also in the European framework, but also in its globality. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today for this very vibrant webinar. And I look forward hearing more from you in the near future to come. But then again, please join us at Strategy International for another webinar series in the near future. Please read out. Soon enough, you will have this webinar online through our website where you can share it with your friends. These are my friends. These are my colleagues. I have faith and trust in them that they can do the best things that they can do. They all have very good opinions, very structured opinions. And so we hope as well to embrace these opinions and somehow put it and expand them and help expand this discussion even further. Mohammed, thank you very much for the late waiting. Thank you very much for being with us today from Dubai. Ahmed from Bahrain, thank you very much. And Nir from Israel, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Very good to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.